Today we have a story that will send a chill down your spine. My son's wife was pouring urine on my bed every night while I slept. She wanted to prove to my son that I was a sick old woman who needed to be locked away in a psychiatric hospital. She didn't know that I was using my last savings to install a hidden camera and that I was about to give my son a front row seat to her evil performance. First and foremost, I want to give a very special, heartfelt shout out to my incredibly loyal subscribers, Linda Reynolds, Eddie Henry from Great Britain, Bernadine Hughes from Florida, and all the other beloved viewers. Your support and kind words mean the world. Thank you for being with me. We would love to know from what corners of the world you're watching. Please let us know your city in the comments below. And now, make yourselves comfortable. My name is Amanda, and I am 67 years old. I was born and raised in the Bronx, in a world that teaches you two things from a young age: how to be tough and how to spot a lie. For most of my life, those two skills had served me well. But the minor stroke I'd suffered last year had been a thief. It hadn't stolen my memories or my wits, but it had stolen my confidence, leaving behind a subtle, lingering fog and a slight limp that felt like a constant, humiliating reminder of my own fragility. The world, which had once felt so solid under my feet, now seemed to tilt and shimmer, especially under bright lights. The stroke had been triggered, the doctors said, by a period of extreme stress. That stress had a name: Josh. My son. He had been laid off from his construction management job, the same job that had supported not only his own wife and young child, but had often supplemented my own meager Social Security income. Watching my only son, a good, hard-working man, lose his footing was a pain deeper than any physical ailment. My husband, God rest his soul, had been gone for 8 years, and the small nest egg he'd left me had been pecked away by inflation and the rising costs of just living. I was, for the first time in my life, truly vulnerable. It was Josh's wife. A woman whose name I find difficult to say now, who had come up with the perfect solution. She was a waitress at a downtown diner, a woman with a smile as bright and as artificial as the fluorescent light she worked under. Amanda, she'd said one afternoon, her voice a symphony of practiced, daughterly concern. Josh and I have been talking. It's not right for you to be here all alone, especially after what happened. And we're struggling, trying to make our rent. Your house is so big. Why don't we move in with you? We can help take care of you, and you'd be helping us so much by letting us rent out our little apartment. We could be a real family, all under one roof. At the time, her words had felt like a lifeline. My loneliness since the stroke had been a physical presence, a cold, silent guest in the spacious house that now felt too big for just one person. The thought of having my son, my grandson, and even her filling these quiet rooms with life and laughter felt like a prayer being answered. I had a big, beautiful home that I loved, but I was house poor, my money tied up in bricks and mortar while I was struggling to afford groceries. Their plan seemed symbiotic, a perfect solution where everyone won. I agreed without a moment's hesitation, my heart swelling with a gratitude that now, in retrospect, tastes like poison in my mouth. The first 6 months were a dream. A false dawn. The house was filled with the chaotic, joyful energy of my grandson's toys scattered across the living room floor. The air, which had been still and silent for so long, was now filled with the sounds of a family. Josh, freed from the immediate pressure of rent, seemed to relax and he threw himself into finding new work. His wife played the part of the dutiful, loving daughter in law to perfection. She would cook my favorite meals, help me with the gardening, and listen with a patient smile as I told old family stories. My loneliness vanished, and the fog in my mind seemed to lift. I thought, with a foolish, grateful heart, that my life had been given back to me. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the atmosphere began to change. The dream began to curdle at the edges. It started with small things. The smiles my daughter-in-law gave me became a little tighter, a little more strained. The offers to help were replaced by long theatrical sighs as she did the dishes. A tension began to creep into the house, a low-grade hum of resentment that I could feel in the air. Josh, still struggling to find a job as good as his last one, grew more frustrated, and their arguments, which had once been quiet, rare things, became more frequent. Their angry whispers seeping through the bedroom walls at night. I tried to make myself smaller, to take up less space in my own home. I stayed in my bedroom more, reading or watching television, trying to be as little of a burden as possible. But it seemed my very presence was the source of the tension. I was the silent, ever-present reminder of their own financial failure, a dependent they had taken on in a moment of crisis who had now become a permanent fixture. The house was no longer a shared sanctuary, it was a territory, and I was beginning to feel like an unwelcome intruder on my own land. The dream of being a real family was beginning to feel like what it had always been, a naive, old woman's foolish fantasy. And the real nightmare was just about to begin. Dear friends, we're so happy you're here with us today. Every time you join, it gives us the chance to share stories that might inspire you, guide you, or even change the way you see things. Your comments and support mean the world to us, and we're truly grateful. Tell us, what challenges have you faced in life, or maybe you're facing right now? We might just find a story that feels close to yours, and who knows, it could be exactly what you need. So stay with us. Don't miss what's coming next. The dream of a happy, bustling family home lasted for about 6 months. In retrospect, I can see that I was so starved for company, so desperate to fill the cavernous silence left by my husband's passing and my own recent health scare, that I willingly blinded myself to the subtle early warning signs. The cracks in the beautiful facade of our new life began to appear slowly, then all at once. My daughter-in-law's smiles, once so bright and seemingly genuine, began to acquire a brittle, painted-on quality. Her offers to help me with chores were replaced by long, theatrical sighs as she loaded the dishwasher, a clear and constant performance of her own martyrdom for my son Josh to witness. The atmosphere in the house grew thick with a tense, unspoken resentment, and I, the woman who had naively believed this arrangement was a symbiotic solution, began to understand that in her eyes I was simply a parasite with a large and comfortable shell. The psychological campaign began with small, almost insignificant acts of sabotage, designed to make me question my own mind. My reading glasses, which I have for 40 years placed on my nightstand before sleep, would turn up in the refrigerator nestled behind a carton of milk. My favorite coffee mug, a gift from my late husband, would vanish for days, only for her to discover it in the back of the garage. Each time her reaction was a masterpiece of performative concern. Oh, Amanda, here are your glasses, she would exclaim, her voice dripping with a cloying false sweetness. You must be so terribly forgetful these days. Don't you worry, that's what we're here for, to help you keep track of things. Her words were termites, chewing away at the foundation of my own confidence. The stroke had already left me feeling unsteady, my own mind a landscape I could no longer fully trust. Her subtle, constant suggestions that I was becoming senile, that my memory was failing, began to take root in the fertile soil of my own fear. I started to second guess myself, to wonder if I really had left my keys in the sugar bowl, or if I had, in fact, been sleepwalking. The campaign escalated from misplaced objects to broken ones. I woke one morning to a sight that made my heart stop. A framed photograph of my husband and me on our wedding day, which had sat on my dresser for 3 decades, was on the floor, the glass shattered into 1,000 tiny diamonds on the hardwood. My daughter-in-law, of course, was the first to the scene, her timing always uncannily perfect. She rushed into my room with a loud theatrical gasp. "Oh my goodness, Amanda, what happened?" she cried, her eyes wide with fake alarm. "Did you have a fall in the night? Did you knock it over? Are you all right?" She framed the event not as an act of vandalism, but as a symptom of my own physical decline. I, of course, had no memory of knocking it over. I had slept soundly, but my own memory was now an unreliable witness in the courtroom of my mind. Her version of events, that I was a frail old woman stumbling around my own room in the dark, seemed, in my fog of self-doubt, entirely plausible. Josh, my son, was of course deeply worried. "See, Josh," I heard her whispering to him later in the hallway. "This is what I was talking about. She's not safe here on her own. She could have been seriously hurt." But the final, most devastating, and most humiliating front in her war against me was yet to come. It was the attack for which I had no defense, the one designed to strip me of the last vestiges of my own dignity. I woke one morning to a horrifying, undeniable, and deeply shameful sensation. The bed was wet. My bed. I was 67 years old, and for the first time in my entire continent life, I had wet the bed. A wave of pure, hot, burning humiliation washed over me. I had never had this problem. I was meticulous about not drinking tea or coffee before bed. It made no sense. It felt like the ultimate betrayal, my own body conspiring with my failing mind to finally and completely undo me. My first frantic instinct was to hide the evidence. I stripped the damp, cold sheets from the bed with clumsy, trembling hands, my face burning with the shame so intense it was a physical heat. I bundled the soiled linens in my arms, my only thought to get them to the laundry room before anyone, before Josh, could see this final terrible proof of my decline. But she was always one step ahead. As I scurried down the hallway, clutching the bundle of shame to my chest, she emerged from her own bedroom, a cup of coffee in her hand, her expression one of sleepy, domestic innocence. Her eyes fell to the bundle in my arms, and then her gaze lifted to meet mine. She feigned a look of dawning, compassionate understanding. "Oh, Amanda," she whispered, her voice a soft, pitying caress that was more humiliating than any shout could have been. "Oh, you poor, dear thing, don't you be embarrassed for 1 second. These things happen. It happens to people your age." She reached out to take the bundle from me. "Here," she said, her kindness a razor blade. "Let me help you with that. You go and get yourself cleaned up." I stood there, frozen in the hallway, as she took my soiled sheets, the physical evidence of my deepest shame, and carried them away. I felt stripped bare, my last shred of dignity gone. The ghost of a doubt, a suspicion about the sheer, uncanny convenience of her timing, tried to surface in my mind, but it was drowned out by the overwhelming, crashing wave of my own humiliation. She had won. She had successfully and systematically convinced me that my mind was broken, that my body was failing, and that I was no longer a competent, capable woman, but a sick, incontinent old woman, a burden. I was a prisoner in my own home, and the warden was the very person who was pretending to be my kindest, most compassionate caretaker. The weeks that followed were a master class in the quiet, insidious art of psychological warfare. My life, which had once been my own, was now curated, managed, and narrated by my daughter-in-law. The humiliating incidents of the wet bed and the broken objects were no longer isolated events. They became the cornerstones of a new and terrible narrative she was building, a story in which I was the tragic, senile, and increasingly burdensome matriarch. She played the part of the devoted, long-suffering caretaker with a theatrical flair that was both convincing and utterly chilling. She would strip my bed with a heavy put-upon sigh loud enough for Josh to hear from the other room. She would speak to me in a slow, patronizingly simple tone, as one would speak to a confused and slightly deaf child. "Now, Amanda," she'd say, holding out my daily medications. "Did we remember to take our little pills today? Let's take them together, shall we?" My world, which had already felt small, began to shrink at an alarming rate. I became a prisoner in my own bedroom. I was afraid to walk through the house, terrified I might accidentally knock something over and provide her with more evidence of my supposed decline. I started to limit my fluid intake after 6 p.m., a desperate, futile attempt to prevent the nightly humiliation that now seemed an inevitable part of my existence. But it made no difference. I would still wake 2 or 3 times a week to that same soul-crushing dampness, a phenomenon that defied all logic and filled me with a creeping, nameless dread. My shame was a thick, suffocating blanket, and I was so wrapped up in it that I couldn't see the hand that was so carefully tucking me in. The true nature of her campaign, however, was revealed not in the things she did to me, but in the words she spoke about me. The walls in my old house were thin, and her voice, when she was agitated, had a sharp, penetrating quality. I began to hear them, my son and his wife, arguing in hushed, intense whispers after they thought I had gone to bed. Their arguments became the soundtrack to my lonely nights, a horrifying and illuminating education in the art of manipulation. One night, I was in my room, the door slightly ajar, and I heard them in the hallway. Her voice was a symphony of false concern. "Josh, honey, I'm just so worried about your mother," she'd said, her tone dripping with a practiced, sorrowful empathy. "This isn't just a little forgetfulness anymore. The bedwetting. I was reading online, and it's a classic late-stage sign of dementia. And she broke another of your father's old model cars last night. She doesn't even remember doing it. What if she falls and really hurts herself? What if she leaves the stove on? We can't watch her 24/7. It's not safe for her. It's not safe for our son." I heard my own son, Josh, his voice full of a weary, conflicted anguish. "I don't know. Dementia? She seems so clear, so normal when I talk to her. That's the disease, baby, she'd replied, her voice rising with a note of triumphant authority. They have moments of clarity. It's what gives the family false hope, but it's getting worse. I see it every day. I found her just staring at the wall for 10 minutes yesterday, completely gone. It is breaking my heart to see her fade away like this. We have to do something. For her own good, we need to start looking into professional full-time care. The phrase professional care hung in the air, a cold, clinical euphemism for the terrible truth of her goal. She wanted to put me away. She wanted me gone. And she was using my own son's love and concern for me as her primary weapon. The final clarifying blow came a few days later. She approached me as I was sitting in the living room, trying to read. She sat down opposite me, her face a mask of solemn, rehearsed gravity. In her hand, she held a glossy trifold pamphlet. I could read the words on the front. Oakwood Meadows Senior Psychiatric and Memory Care Facility. Amanda, she began, her voice the soft, gentle tone one uses at a funeral. Josh and I have been doing a lot of research because we love you, and we are so worried. What's been happening with you? The forgetfulness, the accidents. It looks a lot like the early stages of Alzheimer's. She pushed the glossy pamphlet across the coffee table towards me. My own grandmother had it, she said, her eyes shining with unshed crocodile tears. So I know the signs. I know what this looks like. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had been dormant for a year, something that had been beaten down by a stroke and buried under a mountain of shame and self-doubt, finally, blessedly, woke up. It was the old me, the Amanda from the Bronx, the woman who had raised a son on her own, who had faced down landlords and bosses, who did not suffer fools gladly. And I was looking at the biggest, most audacious fool I had ever met in my life. The sheer, breathtaking, and colossal nerve of this woman, this waitress from a greasy spoon diner with her cheap perfume and her high school education, to sit in my house, on my furniture, and deliver an armchair diagnosis of a degenerative brain disease to me, a disease her own grandmother had supposedly had, was an insult so profound, so deeply offensive to my intelligence, that it acted like a bolt of lightning. It burned away the fog of my confusion, and it incinerated the shame that had been paralyzing me. All that was left was a pure, cold, and diamond-hard rage. I finally saw her. I saw her for exactly what she was, and I knew with an absolute and final certainty that I was not going to let her win. I looked at the glossy trifold pamphlet for the Oakwood Meadows Senior Psychiatric and Memory Care Facility that she had so thoughtfully placed on my coffee table. I saw the pictures of smiling, vacant-eyed seniors sitting in sterile, sunlit rooms. I saw the promises of dignified, compassionate care for those suffering from cognitive decline. It was a beautifully designed piece of marketing, a polite, professional-looking invitation to a living tomb. And it was the single most clarifying document I had ever read in my life. The rage that had ignited inside me was a strange and wonderful thing. It was not a hot, screaming, out-of-control fury. It was a cold, silent, and perfectly focused rage. It burned away the last lingering wisps of the fog of self-doubt that had clouded my mind for months, leaving behind a landscape of crystal-clear, diamond-hard certainty. I looked at my daughter-in-law, at her face, which was a perfect mask of rehearsed, sorrowful empathy, her eyes shining with the unshed crocodile tears of her performance. And I saw her for the first time not as family but as the enemy. She was a hostile, occupying force in my home, and I was about to begin the slow, methodical, and silent work of my own resistance. I did not scream at her. I did not throw her offensive pamphlet back in her face. To do so would have been to give her exactly what she wanted: a hysterical outburst, a confirmation of the emotional instability she had been so carefully manufacturing. Instead, I gave her the one thing she did not expect. I gave her my calm. I picked up the pamphlet, folded it neatly, and placed it beside me on the sofa. "Thank you for your concern," I said, my voice as even and as placid as a frozen lake, "and for your amateur diagnosis. I will certainly take it under advisement." The lack of an emotional reaction completely threw her. Her mask of sorrow flickered, replaced by a flicker of confused frustration. She'd been expecting tears, denials, a fight. She was not prepared for a quiet, dignified dismissal. She had just lobbed a grenade into my life, and I had politely handed it back to her, the pin still in place. "Well, I just hope you'll think about it, Amanda," she stammered, her performance now faltering. "For Josh's sake, he's so worried." "I will think about many things," I replied, my voice still quiet but with an edge of steel that made her flinch. "You can be sure of that." I then picked up my book and opened it, a clear and final signal that this particular conversation was over. She hovered for another moment, uncertain, before finally getting up and walking away, defeated not by an argument but by a silence she could not penetrate. That night, alone in my room, the rage I had so carefully contained finally had room to breathe, and it transformed into a cold, brilliant, and strategic fury. I sat in my armchair in the dark, and I deconstructed her entire gaslighting campaign with the methodical, dispassionate logic of a librarian analyzing a flawed text. The misplaced glasses, the broken photograph, the nightly, inexplicable accidents in my bed. They were not random events or symptoms of my own decline. They were a coordinated, deliberate pattern of psychological abuse designed to make me and my son believe I was losing my mind. The only reason the campaign had been so effective was because it had preyed upon my own deepest fears about my post-stroke vulnerability. She had taken my genuine fear and weaponized it against me. A memory from my childhood in the Bronx surfaced. A piece of advice my tough, pragmatic mother had given me. "Mandy," she'd said, "in this world, there will always be bullies and there will always be liars. You don't ever let them win. And you don't ever let them be the ones to tell your story. You fight back, but you fight smart." I knew I could not win this fight with words. My son's mind had been so thoroughly poisoned by his wife's constant whispers that he would never believe my word against hers. My denials would only be seen as further proof of my confusion. Her lies were the established narrative in this house. To defeat her, I needed a new narrator. I needed a witness that was impartial, irrefutable, and could not be accused of being old or confused or bitter. I needed a witness of pure, unblinking, mechanical truth. I needed a camera. The decision, once made, filled me with a sense of profound and absolute purpose. I walked to my closet and reached for the old metal lockbox hidden on the top shelf. the one that held the last of my emergency savings, the money my late husband had insisted I keep separate for a true life or death crisis. I looked at the stacks of $100 bills, a sum I had guarded for 8 years, and I knew with a certainty that left no room for doubt that this was that crisis. This was a battle for my sanity, for my dignity, and for my freedom. I spent the next 2 hours on my laptop not looking up my symptoms, but researching the best, most discreet nanny cams and audio recording devices on the market. My old librarian skills, the ones I had used to navigate the most obscure corners of academic research, were now deployed in the service of espionage. I read reviews. I compared specifications. I found a set of tiny, nearly invisible cameras, one disguised as a phone charger, another as a smoke detector. With the last of the money my husband had left to protect me, I filled my online shopping cart. I clicked the confirm purchase button, and the act was a quiet digital declaration of war. The evidence was on its way. The game was about to change. And the waitress, the amateur diagnostician, was about to find out what it felt like to be up against a woman from the Bronx with nothing left to lose. The 3 days I had to wait for the package to arrive were a masterclass in the art of performance. I shuffled through the house, my limp perhaps a little more pronounced, my expression a little more vacant. I became the woman my daughter-in-law believed me to be, a frail, confused, and utterly defeated old woman. I would forget where I had put my reading glasses, only to have her find them for me with a triumphant, pitying smile. I would sit in my armchair, staring into space, allowing her to report to Josh that I'd had another episode. My weakness was now my camouflage. My supposed senility, a carefully constructed invisibility cloak under which the real Amanda, the sharp, furious, and methodical woman from the Bronx, was quietly preparing for war. The package arrived on a Thursday afternoon, a plain, brown, anonymous-looking box from Amazon. The delivery truck's arrival sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me, but my face remained a placid mask. My daughter-in-law was in the kitchen, and she saw the delivery through the window. "Looks like a package for you, Amanda," she called out, her voice carrying its usual note of condescending cheer. "What did you order now? Did you forget you already bought new slippers last week?" "Oh," I said, my voice a convincing imitation of vague confusion. I think those are the special orthopedic socks my podiatrist recommended for the swelling in my ankles." The lie was simple, plausible, and utterly boring. It was the perfect cover. She lost interest immediately, turning her attention back to her phone. I walked to the front door, my heart hammering against my ribs, and retrieved the box. It felt surprisingly heavy in my hands, heavy with the weight of its purpose. It was my arsenal, my secret weapon. I carried it back to my bedroom and hid it in the back of my closet beneath a stack of old winter sweaters. The waiting was the hardest part. I needed the house to be empty for at least a few hours to execute my plan, a rare occurrence in our tense, cohabitating existence. My opportunity came 2 days later. It was their anniversary, and Josh, in a rare grand gesture, had made reservations at a fancy downtown restaurant and booked a hotel room for the night. They were going to have a much-needed break, as my daughter-in-law announced to me, her words a clear implication that I was the source of the stress they needed a break from. I played my part beautifully, wishing them a wonderful time, urging them to relax and not worry about me for 1 second. The moment their car pulled out of the driveway, I was a woman transformed. The slow, shuffling limp vanished. The vague, confused expression was replaced by one of sharp, focused intensity. I was a soldier on a mission, and the clock was ticking. I retrieved the box from my closet and laid its contents out on my bed. The cameras were technological marvels, tiny, brilliant instruments of truth. One was disguised as a USB phone charger, another as a smoke detector. The audio recorders were no bigger than a thumbnail. I read the instructions, my old librarian's mind absorbing the technical details with a swift, easy comprehension. The installation was a tense and physically demanding operation. My first target was my own bedroom. I needed a camera with a clear, unobstructed view of my bed and the entire room. The best spot was a high wall outlet across from the foot of my bed, but it required me to stand on a chair. My balance, a casualty of the stroke, was not what it used to be. With a deep breath, I dragged my sturdy desk chair over to the wall. My legs trembled as I stepped onto it, one hand braced against the wall. I unplugged the small nightlight that was there and plugged in the new charger, my fingers fumbling with the small deceptive device. I angled it just so, its tiny, nearly invisible lens now a silent, unblinking eye, standing guard over my most vulnerable space. Next, the smoke detector camera. This was for the living room, the heart of the house, the place where their late-night, whispered arguments so often took place. This was the most difficult part. It required me to climb a small stepladder and fiddle with the wiring. My hands, which had once been so nimble, felt clumsy and stiff. A wave of dizziness, a lingering ghost of my stroke, washed over me as I stood on the third step, and for a terrifying moment I thought I was going to fall. I clung to the ladder, my eyes squeezed shut, and waited for the world to stop spinning. The irony was not lost on me. My daughter-in-law's plot to have me declared an invalid was very nearly accomplished by my own efforts to expose her. But the feeling passed. I connected the wires, snapped the new, duplicitous smoke detector into place, and climbed back down, my body slick with a cold sweat. The audio recorders were easier. I taped one to the underside of the kitchen table and another to the back of the headboard of their own bed, a last-minute, audacious decision. If they were going to conspire against me, I was going to be a party to every single one of their conversations. When the last device was in place, I meticulously cleaned up every trace of my work, a secret agent erasing my own footprints. I put the stepladder away, I threw the packaging into the bottom of the outside recycling bin, and I went back to my bedroom. I sat down in my armchair, my heart still pounding from the exertion and the adrenaline. I looked around the room at the small black phone charger that was now my silent sentinel, and I felt a profound sense of power. When they returned home the next afternoon, I was back in character. I was sitting in my armchair, a book lying open but unread in my lap, my expression one of vague, pleasant confusion. I was the frail, harmless old woman they believed me to be, but as I went to bed that night, I was not filled with the usual familiar dread. I was feigning sleep, my breathing deep and even, but my mind was wide awake, sharp and alert. I was no longer the victim in this house. I was the hunter, and the trap, my beautiful, intricate, and invisible trap, was now set. The first 2 nights after the cameras were installed were a strange and terrible form of torture. I continued my performance, playing the part of the declining matriarch with an Oscar-worthy commitment. I endured another accident in my bed, waking to the familiar soul-crushing dampness, and I allowed my daughter-in-law to perform her well-rehearsed act of martyred, compassionate care. I allowed her to discover that my favorite porcelain vase had been knocked over and shattered, a vase that had sat on the same high shelf for 20 years. Inside, I was a coiled spring of cold, silent fury, but on the outside, I was a convincing portrait of bewildered, gentle decline. Each morning, as soon as the house was empty, I would go through the tense, heart-pounding ritual of retrieving the small memory cards from the cameras. I would lock myself in my room, insert the card into my laptop, and watch the footage from the night before, my breath held tight in my chest. But for 2 nights, there was nothing. The video showed only the long, silent, and uneventful hours of me sleeping in my bed. The audio recorders captured nothing but the mundane sounds of a sleeping house. A terrible creeping doubt began to gnaw at me. Had I been wrong? Had my grief and my stroke truly made me paranoid? Was I, in fact, the crazy old woman she was so determined to prove I was? The thought was a cold poison, and for a moment I felt myself begin to succumb to it. The truth, when it finally revealed itself, arrived on the 3rd morning. I sat down at my desk, my hands trembling slightly as I inserted the memory card from the camera disguised as a phone charger. I clicked on the video file, the timestamp reading 2:17 a.m. The video began, showing the familiar, silent scene of my own bedroom, illuminated in the grainy, ethereal grayscale of the camera's night vision. I was a still, vulnerable form under the blankets, my breathing slow and even, and then I saw it. The doorknob to my bedroom turned with an agonizing, silent slowness. The door creaked open, a sliver of hallway light cutting across the dark room. A figure slipped inside, moving with a stealthy, practiced confidence that spoke of many prior visits. It was her, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing a dark robe, and she moved with the silent, predatory grace of a cat. She stood over my bed for a long, chilling moment, her head tilted, listening to my breathing to ensure I was truly asleep. The camera was perfectly positioned. It captured the expression on her face, and it was this that was the most horrifying part of all. There was no anger, no rage, no emotional turmoil. There was only a look of cold, bored, and slightly irritated efficiency, the look of a person taking out the trash or scrubbing a stubborn stain. I was not a person to her. I was a task, an unpleasant chore to be completed. In her hand, she held a small, clear plastic bottle, the kind one might use for shampoo when traveling. I watched, my own breathing having stopped, as she expertly and silently unscrewed the cap. She then leaned over my sleeping form, and with a steady, deliberate hand, she carefully poured a stream of the bottle's contents, a dark, yellowish liquid, onto the sheets near my hips, creating the very stain of my deepest humiliation. But she wasn't finished. Her work of fabricating my decline for the evening was not yet complete. She crept over to my antique dresser, the one that had belonged to my own mother. On it sat a beautiful, delicate porcelain music box, a gift from my late husband from our last anniversary together. She picked it up. She looked at it for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a small, almost casual movement of her wrist, she nudged it off the edge of the dresser. It fell to the hardwood floor, and even though the video was silent, I could almost hear the sound of it shattering, Another piece of my history, my memory, deliberately and maliciously destroyed. She then gave the room one last satisfied look, slipped back out into the hallway, and pulled the door quietly shut behind her. I sat there, staring at the laptop screen at the frozen image of my daughter-in-law's face. The validation was a hollow, sickening thing. It brought no triumph, only a profound and nauseating horror. It is one thing to suspect a terrible truth. It is another thing entirely to watch it unfold in cold, hard, irrefutable grayscale, to witness the quiet, methodical, and passionless evil of a person you have welcomed into your home and treated as family. My hands, now steady with a purpose that was as cold and as hard as a block of ice, ejected the memory card. I then inserted the card from the audio recorder I had placed under their kitchen table. I fast-forwarded through hours of meaningless chatter until I found a conversation from the previous evening. It was Josh and his wife. "Another accident last night," I heard her say, her voice a perfect imitation of weary, heartbroken concern. "The smell, Josh. It was awful. We can't keep living like this. I called Oakwood Meadows today just to get some information on their memory care unit." I heard my son sigh, a sound of pure, exhausted defeat. "I don't know," he said. "It just seems so final." "It's for her own good, honey," she'd replied, her voice rising with a sharp, manipulative urgency. "And for ours. Do you want to wait until she burns the house down with a forgotten cigarette? The doctor will listen to me. I'm her primary caregiver. I'll tell him about the music box she broke last night. It's getting worse, Josh. We have to do something before it's too late." That was it. I had it all. The visual evidence of her crimes and the audio evidence of her conspiracy to have me committed. I carefully copied the files onto a new encrypted flash drive. The hunter had her proof. Now, all that was left was to decide on the time, the place, and the method of the final public execution of her lies. With the encrypted flash drive, my irrefutable proof safely tucked away, a profound and liberating calm settled over me. The game had changed. I was no longer a pawn in my daughter-in-law's cruel and twisted game. I was now the player who held the checkmate move. The question was not if I would make my move, but when. I knew that the timing, the setting, and the audience would be just as important as the evidence itself. A private confrontation would allow her to lie, to manipulate, to twist the narrative to my son. No, this had to be a public execution, a trial held in the court of our own family, and my son, Josh, needed to be the sole member of the jury. For the next 2 days, I was a ghost of a different kind. I was not the sad, confused ghost she had tried to create, but a quiet, patient, and watchful one. I continued my performance of gentle decline, shuffling through the house, speaking in soft, hesitant tones. My daughter-in-law, in turn, escalated her own performance. Her concern now so thick and suffocating it was almost comical. She would hover over me, asking if I was feeling all right, her eyes shining with a false predatory sympathy. She was a vulture, growing impatient, circling what she believed to be a dying animal, eager for the feast to begin. She had no idea the animal was merely playing dead, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I chose Sunday evening for the confrontation. Sunday had always been our family dinner night, a tradition I had upheld for 30 years. It felt fitting that the final act of this family drama would play out on that same stage. I made a simple, comforting meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, a deliberate choice to ground the coming storm in the familiar soil of our shared past. As we sat at the dinner table, the atmosphere was thick with a strange, unspoken tension. Josh looked weary, the stress of his unemployment and his wife's constant campaign of whispers clearly wearing him down. My daughter-in-law was practically vibrating with a triumphant, barely contained energy. She clearly believed my final surrender was imminent. After the plates were cleared, I made my move. "Josh, honey," I began, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through their small talk. "Could you and I have a word in the living room? There's something important I'd like to discuss with you both." My formal tone was so uncharacteristic that it immediately put them on edge. My daughter-in-law's face lit up with a look of triumphant anticipation. This was it. The moment the old woman finally breaks down and agrees to be put away. "Of course, Amanda," she said, her voice dripping with a feigned solemn concern. "We're here for you." We moved to the living room. I sat in my usual armchair, a position of quiet authority. I had them sit together on the sofa opposite me. I looked at my son, at his tired, worried face, and my heart ached for the blow I was about to deliver. But it was a necessary wound, a form of radical surgery required to cut the cancer of his wife's lies from his life. I began, my gaze fixed on my daughter-in-law. "I want to thank you," I said, my voice as calm and even as a prayer, "for your concern. For the past several months, you have been so attentive. You've pointed out my forgetfulness. You've been there to witness my clumsiness, my accidents. You've been building a very strong case to my son that I am no longer fit to live on my own." She preened under the perceived praise, a small, smug smile playing on her lips. "Of course, Amanda," she said, placing a comforting hand on Josh's arm. "We just want what's best for you. We love you." "Yes," I said, "love. It's a powerful motivator." I then reached for the remote control for the large television that was mounted on the wall. "And because you have both been so worried and because I too have been so confused by all these strange events, I decided to do a little research of my own. I thought it was important that we all look at the evidence together so we can make an informed and logical decision about my future." I had spent the afternoon connecting my laptop to the television's HDMI port. The trap was set. "I've put together a short film," I said, my voice still unnervingly serene. "A collection of highlights from the past few nights. I think you'll both find it very illuminating." Before either of them could fully process my words, before they could object or question, I pressed play. The television screen, which had been dark, flickered to life. The image was the grainy black and white night vision view of my own bedroom. The timestamp in the corner of the screen read 2:17 a.m. The room was silent, and the only movement was the gentle rise and fall of the blankets on my bed where my own sleeping form was visible. And then the bedroom door creaked open. A figure slipped inside. My daughter-in-law. On the large 55-inch screen, her every movement was magnified, her every intention made horrifyingly clear. The video showed her creeping to my bedside, the small, clear bottle in her hand. It showed her looking down at my sleeping face, her own expression one of cold, detached efficiency. It showed her deliberately and carefully pouring the contents of the bottle onto my sheets, And then it showed her walking to the dresser, picking up my late husband's porcelain music box, and with a casual, almost bored cruelty, nudging it off the edge to shatter on the floor below. I did not look at the screen. I knew what was on it. I looked only at my son. I watched as his face, which had been a mask of weary confusion, transformed. I saw the initial flicker of disbelief, his mind refusing to process the monstrous images on the screen. I saw the disbelief give way to a dawning, sickening comprehension. And then, as the video played on, as he watched his own wife, the mother of his child, commit this act of profound and intimate evil against his own sleeping mother, I saw his heart break in real time. The color drained from his face, his mouth fell open, and his eyes, his beautiful, kind eyes, filled with a look of such catastrophic, soul-shattering horror that it was a pain far worse than any broken object, any soiled sheet, could ever inflict. The checkmate was not for her, it was for him. The video ended. The screen went black, and in its dark, reflective surface, I could see the distorted, horrified faces of my son and his wife. The silence that filled the living room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating void where the last, terrible truth had been laid bare. For a full minute, no one moved, no one breathed. We were three figures frozen in a tableau of ruin. A son utterly broken by the truth, a wife exposed in her treachery, and a mother who had been forced to burn down her own family in order to save herself. My daughter-in-law was the first to break, her mind scrambling for a defense in the face of an indefensible position. Her denial was a frantic, sputtering, pathetic thing. "It's not real," she shrieked, her voice a shrill, ugly sound in the quiet room. "It's a trick. She's faked it, Josh. She's a crazy old woman. She knows how to use computers. She could have edited it. You can't possibly believe this over me, your own wife." But her words were empty, useless bullets firing into a void. Josh did not even look at her. His gaze was fixed on me, and his eyes were a landscape of pure, unadulterated devastation. The foundations of his world, his marriage, his trust in his wife, his own perception of his mother's decline, had all been demolished in the space of 3 minutes of grainy nighttime footage. The tears that streamed down his face were not just for my betrayal, but for his own profound and unforgivable blindness. "Mom," he whispered, his voice a broken, rattling thing. "Oh God, Mom, I had no idea. I am so sorry. I am so sorry." I looked at my son, at this good, weak man who had allowed himself to be so thoroughly manipulated, and I felt a wave of profound, aching pity. "I know you didn't know, Josh," I said, and my voice was not angry but filled with a weary sadness. "But a part of you didn't want to know. You chose to believe the easy, convenient lie over the hard, uncomfortable truth. You chose to believe that your mother was losing her mind because it was easier than believing that your wife was a cruel and calculating liar. That choice, that blindness, is on you." He flinched. The truth of my words a deserved and necessary blow. He finally, slowly turned his head to look at his wife. The love and trust he had once had for her was gone, replaced by a look of such cold, quiet contempt that it made her shrink back into the sofa cushions. "How could you?" he whispered, his voice devoid of all its previous warmth. "How could you do that to my mother in her own home while she was sleeping?" Seeing that she had lost him, she played her final desperate card. She tried to use their son, my grandson, as a human shield. I did it for us, Josh, she cried, her voice rising with a note of hysterical self-justification. For our family, so we could have a future, so our son could have a stable home. By trying to lock my mother in a psychiatric asylum, he asked, his voice a low, dangerous growl. By tormenting a sick old woman, you call that a future? That's not a future. That's a nightmare. And you built it. He stood up, his movement stiff as if he were suddenly an old man himself. He looked at his wife, the woman he had promised to love and cherish, and he delivered his verdict. Pack your things, he said, his voice flat, empty of all emotion. Pack our son's things. We're leaving tonight. What? She gasped. Are you divorcing me? He let out a short, bitter, humorless laugh. No, he said, and the words were perhaps the cruelest punishment of all. I'm not going to divorce you. I'm not going to make my son a child of a broken home because of the poison you've created. We will stay married. We will raise our son. But you and I, whatever we were, it's over. It died tonight, right here, on that television screen. You are the mother of my child, and that is all you will ever be to me again. Now go and pack. And so, the final act of the play unfolded in a grim, funereal silence. I sat in my armchair, a silent, victorious queen on her throne, and I watched as the woman who had tried to destroy me scurried to pack her belongings. She did not look at me again. She could not. An hour later, they were gone. Josh gave me one last long and heartbroken look from the doorway before turning and following his wife out into the darkness. I stood up and walked to the front door, closing and locking it behind them. The silence that settled over the house now was different from the lonely silence of the past year. This was a new kind of quiet. It was the clean, quiet, and profoundly peaceful silence of a home that has been reclaimed. It was the sound of my own sovereignty. I was alone again, but I was not lonely. I was the master of my own house, the captain of my own mind. I had been tested. I had been betrayed, and I had been pushed to the very brink of my own sanity. But I had not broken. I had trusted myself. I had trusted my instincts. I had trusted the tough, resilient, and unapologetic woman from the Bronx who still lived inside me. And she, in the end, had saved us all.